Well, thank you very much for having me along. First of all, to the meeting. Keen to kind of give you a bit of an overview about what we do in the housing team at South Lanarkshire Council, and in particular the strategy side, which I'm involved in. I'm a strategy and policy advisor, and it's our job to kind of deliver things like the local housing strategy, which we're going to touch upon in a bit of detail. Link that then to how we sort of aim to improve energy efficiency within homes, and that's all tenure homes, so owner occupiers, private landlords, and our own social tenants as well. Challenges facing building owners, as you would have seen in the press, this whole transition to net zero is a big thing. Whether you own a house, whether you own a business, it's going to impact you no matter what. So there's a lot of challenges and a lot of unknowns coming up in the next couple of decades. And then touched upon it there, Janet, but probably wanted to give a bit of flavour of some of the work that's going on in bigger in terms of the social housing developments, and also then things that are happening in the future that may be available to owner occupiers or to private landlords as well in the bigger area. So background then to the local housing strategy itself, which is our big all-tenure document that we use to then try and drive forward improvements in housing right across South Lanarkshire. So as I say, it's all tenure, so it covers the three main tenures: social, private, rented, and owner occupiers as well. We have a statutory duty to do that, so it reports directly to the Housing Minister, where we have requirements to cover a range of different aspects as bulleted on the list just there. So we need to detail what we're doing around new housing supply, how we're going to meet demand for that. We also need to detail around energy efficiency, which is what I'd like to talk a bit more about today, around climate change, how we're going to meet the transition to net zero, around fuel poverty as well, how we're going to support people who may be susceptible or are actually in fuel poverty, and how we're going to try and bring them out of fuel poverty, as well as supporting people with particular needs to live independently. So as people get older, how are we going to support them to live, either remain in their own home or make sure there's provision for somewhere for them to go, whether it's shelter accommodation, whether it's care facilities, anything like that. It needs to be considered within the local housing strategy and working with partners right across the board to deliver that. And then finally, one of the most important aspects of it is the prevention and reduction of homelessness right across South Lanarkshire as well, which you can imagine is a real priority for us. So the structure to the document itself, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, don't want to bore you all, put you all to sleep. This is more policy brain coming in here, but essentially we have a kind of three-pronged approach within the local housing strategy. So you can see the figure on the right-hand side there in terms of housing supply, affordability and choice, housing quality and energy efficiency, supporting independent living and specialist provision. And then sandwiched either side of that, we have actions related to promoting sustainable housing, addressing homelessness and sustainable places as well. So you can see the kind of things that was drawn out from the statutory requirements. That's within our current, the kind of structure of our current strategy as well. And how we deliver that, I'll touch upon that in a bit more detail around the energy efficiency, housing quality side, but all of these things we don't do alone. We do with other people within the council, we do with other services, our health, our homeless partners, with our registered social landlords, and Janet touched upon Clydesdale Housing Association earlier, so that's one of our key partners in the bigger and Clydesdale area. We also do it in partnership with the Scottish Government through the likes of the Affordable Housing Supply Programme, where they give us a lot of grant money to build new homes in the right places for people to live in as well. But all that's kind of underpinned by an action plan and framework which details a lot of the actions that we have to do, and I think this sets about 98 actions on the local housing strategy across those different chapters. Quickly touch upon where this sits. This isn't the only plan that we have. As you can see it in the box in the yellow in the middle, but it links very closely to a lot of the other ones. So some of these are a bit more technical, some of them are a bit, you wouldn't expect to know about them unless you had a real interest in housing policy or local government structure. But some might jump out at you, things that you may have come across or been referred to if you had inquiries with the council. So the one sitting right next to it there, the local development plan, that's the big planning document that our colleagues in planning have to prepare on a 5-yearly basis as well, which details what the land use is going to be for particular areas. So when you see a new housing site springing up somewhere, you'll know that that land must have been earmarked for housing. Now, not everywhere is suitable for housing, as you can understand, with transport links, with ground conditions, all those kind of things. But there is pockets of land that we set aside that we think will be suitable for housing. And there is a requirement, just like we have some within the local housing strategy, there is a requirement within the local development plan to ensure there's enough provision for housing over the next 10, 15 years based on some of the analysis that we do around how many people we think want to live in South Lanarkshire and what type of people are going to live there, what type of housing they need as well. And so that's all things that we do. And some of the little red boxes down the bottom here, we take this forward on a regional basis with 8 other local authorities across the Glasgow City region. But the housing need and demand assessment is what we use to then inform our planning with planning colleagues and with housing colleagues to make sure that we continue to meet the needs right across private and social sectors of housing as well. The other one, and for tonight's conversation, is the Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy on the left-hand side of that document. That's a big one that we're currently reviewing with our colleagues in that team. And again, you can imagine it's with all the kind of net zero and the ambition around that just now, that's a real big thing for the council to take forward. So not only are we looking at how we can support our tenants, the people and also other people within South Lanarkshire who own their own home or who rent their own home, but also how do we do it on a commercial and industrial setting as well? How do we support business owners to take forward the ambition to net zero and decarbonisation? And how do we do it for our own non-domestic buildings as well? The council, as you can imagine, is a big building owner. It has a lot of buildings, a lot of swimming pools, a lot of schools, all those kind of things. And it's about, well, right now they produce a lot of carbon emissions. So how do we get them down to meet the government's aims around them as well? I'll not touch upon any of the top right and the blue ones. They're a bit more corporate and whatever, but the one that you may have heard that you may have been involved in or asked to be involved in as well is the community plan or the local outcomes improvement plan. And that's our colleagues in community planning to take that forward. And it's really about understanding what people's needs, what people's preferences are across all the different towns and villages and populated areas in South Lanarkshire, and then pulling that all together and trying to come up with making sure that our services and partner services are designed for them, as opposed to us telling people what we think they need. So in terms of energy efficiency then, as I said, the LHS has 8 different outcomes in it that cover a whole host of different things, but outcome 4 is the one that really focuses on energy efficiency and decarbonisation, and also where we're trying to get the energy from. So housing quality and energy efficiency has improved, and more of the energy used comes from low carbon and renewable sources. That back in 2017 was our kind of overarching aim that we wanted to do that. And we've got a range of measures that sit and have done over the last 5 years that allow us to kind of monitor how we're doing in terms of that as well. So these are the 3 that I've picked out that are probably most relevant to yourselves at this meeting today. So first one is social housing focus. So you may have heard of the energy efficiency standards for social housing. That's something we've been working with the Scottish Government over the last 15 years or so to try and improve. We started off at something like 60%. We're now up at about 93% of our properties meeting this. The ones that don't meet this are because they're either too old or just it's not economically viable to put in all the insulation, the new heating systems, all that kind of stuff to get them up to standard. So we're doing pretty well on that. We got up to 93%, and then last year the government came out with, well, we've got EASH 2 now, the energy efficiency standards for social housing 2, which we dropped right way back down to 6.5%. So we're almost got the 100%, and we're now back down at 6.5%. But that's a really high standard, and there's no expectation that you're ever going to get to 100% with your current council stock. But it gives you another goal to work towards over the next 10 years or so. The second one that's really probably jumping out for yourself. So there's one on fuel poverty, which is of course extremely important, and we estimate that through the Scottish Housing Conditions Survey. But the second one that you may be familiar with is the SAP rating, so the standard assessment procedure. So when you sell your home, obviously you need to do a home report, and you'll also get an EPC certificate as well, which tells you how energy efficient your home currently is, and recommends new things that you can do to it to make it more energy efficient. And when you're buying a house, the exact same process happens as well. You get a copy of that, so you know what could be done over the next wee while to improve your energy efficiency. So we certainly know that all the homes in South Lanarkshire, there's differences between the different tenures, but we know that we can see that gradually creeping up as a lot of the investment programmes kick in, and I'll touch upon them in a wee second. But that's how we monitor as well how efficient homes are in South Lanarkshire, and that's taken from, again, the Scottish Household Conditions Survey, but also with a supplementary data from the Energy Savings Trust, who provide us with a lot of information on that as well. So how do we intend to try and improve these, or how have we intended to improve these things over the last few years anyway? So one of the things that we want to do with the private sector, and we try to do is to the best of our ability, is to secure maximum external funding possible to promote home energy efficiency improvements. So you may have heard of things like the Energy Efficient Scotland Area-Based Schemes Programme. That is essentially government money, central government money that comes from the Scottish Government that can be used by homeowners, by private landlords, to invest in their own properties. So it's match funding essentially. So if you say you want to put new internal insulation in, you'll see these schemes and things that say, actually, you can do that, but we'll give you £1,000 towards it or something like that. So it's usually about 50% you need to pay, or they'll pay a little bit more for different things in different areas, depending on what the issues are. So there's a range of schemes out there that do that. We try and promote the availability of them to homeowners and to private landlords as well. We also work with partners to promote energy supplier comparison and switching as a means of securing best value and minimising fuel costs. That's a bit of a mouthful. But what we do with that is we have a fuel poverty subgroup that we sit down with them every couple of months, and that's got partners from right across all the advice agencies that you'd expect. So Home Energy Scotland are there, our own Money Matters advice service that's funded through the council, the Citizens Advice Bureau. We sit down with them and we make sure they tell us exactly what the problems that people are coming to them with, and then we make sure that those people are aware of the potential solutions to them. So whether it's short-term energy vouchers, which is a big thing at the moment, obviously with the increase in bills, whether it's longer-term investment in their property, we make sure they point in the right direction and work with them to allow those people to try and get out of any issues or fuel poverty risk as well. District heating system, that's another big thing that's happened, taken off over the last couple of years. So there's a real focus now on where would be a district heating system, where can you put them? So what's going to happen now in terms of this kind of stuff is when we build a new school, we'll look at the houses nearby and think, is it suitable for a district heating system? Is there something there that we could then put a big boiler in, won't be a boiler, but a big energy source in the school, and then that would have heating pipes that would go under to nearby houses and things. And there's a lot of interest from the Scottish Government around that just now, and it's something that we're looking to take forward and across all the different divisions of South Lanarkshire. But obviously, as you can imagine, it's big capital projects, cost a lot of money, and you need to make sure that the houses nearby are going to buy into that and are keen to do that. You certainly couldn't just go and put a hot pipe into someone's house and say, this is now your heating system. You need to work with owners and other tenants to do that as well. And then the other two at the bottom there are really just about delivering the right investment projects to make sure that we continue to meet these targets that are there. And the Scottish Energy Efficiency Programmes one is another funding source that we can use and direct toward domestic and non-domestic energy supplies for that. So that's where we get our funding for the solar panels that you see go up in schools or sheltered housing complexes. A lot of the solar panels that go on any of the other kind of public buildings as well, those kind of things come from that energy source. So we make sure we have all that. So the eagle-eyed of you will probably notice that it was the 2017 to 22 local housing strategy. Obviously, we're sitting in 22 just now, and so statutory requirement is that we produce another one for the next 5 years. Now, a lot of the work that we've done and I've touched upon there is still underway. We had a nasty thing called COVID in the way, which put a delay on a lot of the projects we were taking forward, but there's a lot of good work that's been done over the last 5 years, and now we need to write a new strategy for the next 5 years and really up the game in terms of energy efficiency and decarbonisation as well. Targets have all changed, and I'll touch upon them in a wee second, but there's a lot of new things, new technology out there, a lot of the new opportunities for the council and for owners of buildings right across South Lanarkshire as well. We're keen to try and get as much of that into the new strategy as possible. So we're currently working with stakeholders at the moment. So all the partners that I listed kind of at the start of the presentation, we're working with them at the moment to kind of really put a skeleton together of what this new strategy would look like. And then it'll come to yourselves, 3-month public consultation in June and August. And I'd be more than happy if there's one of these meetings to come along, or one of my colleagues will, to talk through the proposed strategy and get your views on what you think would be really important to be in it. And then we'll send it to the Scottish Government for approval, and also to the Council's Executive Committee later in the year as well, for final sign-off. And then that'll allow us to work ahead against all these new targets and actions for the next 5 years as well. But absolutely, the chapter on energy efficiency and decarbonisation is you can imagine, going to ramp up quite significantly. So building owners then, so you may have heard of things like the route to net zero and the energy efficiency for Scotland programme. The heating building strategy is one that came out last year and got into the news a little bit, but there is a range of targets for what types of domestic buildings that if you own, or if you're a landlord, in terms of a social landlord or private landlord, or even if you own your own property as well. So you can see there in the three kind of bullets, there's a range of different measures, or different timescales for people to try and work towards when they're trying to get their EPC bandings up again. So the target's different right there across the three different tenures, but what the heating building strategy did do last year was for all properties to try and achieve a band C as quickly as possible. Now, 2028 was floated about. Obviously, that's not going to be possible for many building owners, but they're looking to do that. And one of the things they've picked out is for private landlords to do that by 2028. They haven't confirmed it for owner occupiers, but it's certainly going to be, I think, coming forward a little bit more than 2040. So they're changing the goalposts with these as well, which is challenging itself, and it's a challenge for us as the council when we've got big investment projects for our 25,000 homes. But you can imagine if you're a building owner as well, these are quite significant investments that you need to make to your own house. So it's quite important then that okay, well, what do I need to do to get up to this standard? How do I do that? What's help's available for me? And then if I want to sell my property or if I want to buy a property, what is actually going to be the consequences if I can't get up to that standard? And it's trying to understand where the government's thinking around that. So ties back into one of the actions that we have within the LHS, which is to try and support people as much as possible and point people in the right direction to enable them to make the right decisions for their buildings. And it helps if we can do that with a bit of funding behind us as well, to say, actually, you can get a couple of £1,000 towards this new air source heat pump that you need to build on your property. Suppose finally then, just wanted to, before we move on to any questions that you might have or any kind of inquiries in relation to the council, but wanted to touch upon what's happening in Biggar. So I think you would have had to have your head in the sand if you hadn't seen the big huge new development that's sitting on Edinburgh Road on the way up there. So there's a big one being developed by Story Homes, and as part of the Section 75 agreement, which is essentially requires all developers to allow social housing to be developed on the site as well, affordable housing on the site. So we have 24 new homes. The council have 24 new homes at the development, comprising of semi-detached 2-storey homes and also bungalows as well, with attic accommodation available within them. They are the most energy efficient homes we're currently building in the programme. They're complete with solar panels. They have very high thermal insulation properties as well. They also have ample green space around them. There's a space for play there as well, so there's within the site. And we tried to keep it in the surroundings. The architects tried to keep it in the surroundings of other buildings in Biggar. I know there may be some of the people who maybe just think you didn't do a very good job of that, but that's certainly the brief that the architects had at the start, was trying to make it so it didn't look like it had just been taken out of Glasgow or something like that and dumped in a beautiful little town like Biggar. But it was something that we were conscious of, that it needs to fit in with the surroundings that are already there. So that was the plan at the start, and they're now complete with tenants moving into them. So the tenants are allocated based on their needs. So the bungalows, which you can see on the kind of top right just there, say it's step-free access. It's trying to make it as adaptable as possible to anybody who has maybe mobility issues or is perhaps a bit older and would benefit from having a bungalow with everything on the one level. And you can see the solar panels just at the top there as well. The kitchens are all designed to specification for sort of wheelchair turning space available, that kind of stuff as well. And then we've got the semi-detached properties just there as well, with car parking spaces available. Geared up for EV charging ports as well, if possible. Should the tenant need to put that in, it wouldn't take very much for that to go in as well. So we've tried to make them as future-proof as possible, tried to make them as energy efficient as possible. They are as energy efficient as certainly our grant funding would allow at the moment. And the feedback that we have from tenants is they absolutely love them. So it's really pleasing to see that when you've been following that project from the start. I think Janet touched upon it as well. So coming up in Biggar, the area as well, we have the Clydesdale Housing Association have submitted plans within our strategic housing investment plan, which is essentially a 5-year rolling plan of where we think housing is going to be built over the next kind of 5 to 10 years. So they're planning on building a small number of properties in Biggar over the next couple of years. So they've looked to draw down grant funding from the Scottish Government next year, ready for building for 2023, I think. So you may see them coming up as well. I said at the start that touch upon some of the options available for homeowners in terms of improving their current stock as well. So we do have Energy Efficient Scotland area-based schemes programs available, within South Lanarkshire, a couple of areas of South Lanarkshire. So if you are thinking about looking to get some improvements done on your property and you own your property, then feel free to get in touch with myself, and I'll put you involved with the right investment team, and we can walk you through the process of claiming grant funding, and which contractors you can speak to as well about that, because there is a range of public money that's available to help you get your home the way it should be. The other final thing on that would be that there's also eco schemes available, so right across South Lanarkshire as well. Eco schemes are, for those that don't know, that's administered by the UK government, and what that is the little bit on the energy bill, which is getting increasing every time, which says contribution to green tariffs, or your green tariff on your energy bill. Some of that goes towards the energy companies' bank accounts for improving the quality of homes for people. So energy companies then have an obligation. Energy company obligation is the acronym ECO, to fund improvements to people's properties, and that's not done through the council. We administer it through a statement of intent, it's called. So we make sure the people that are going into these doors and asking to help them do that are high quality contractors and people that will do the right job and say they're going to do that. But then it's up between a contractor, and there's a range of contractors who work right across South Lanarkshire then that would actually deliver the work and claim the money back from the government. So it should be at any cost to any homeowner as well. So if you do get any kind of letter or information about that and you're not quite sure about that from one of these contractors, you can get in touch with myself or just through the website as well, and we can verify that it is actually somebody and it's not somebody trying to cause you a scam or anything like that. That's me. I'm happy to take, I know I didn't go into too much detail on some of the aspects there. I'm happy to take any questions, or if you have any kind of any other questions about any of the council services. I can't promise I'll answer all of them, but I'll try my best. Feel free to let me know.
Make that big so I can see it. There we go. Right. Okay. Evening, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm a director at John Gilbert Architects. We're based in Glasgow, but we are a, oh, hold on, how do I make that go? That's down there, there's the button. Right, we are a practice of around about 20 people now, and we're doing work all over the UK. We started and traditionally are a straightforward architect's practice. We do architecture, we design a lot of housing, we do a lot of social housing. We did some conservation and retrofit, and about 10 years ago we decided what we would really try and do is really go for evidence-led design and really invest in research and development and testing of our product, testing of our products, our houses. We really got into that, and we're still really into that, and we developed a thing called Hab Lab, which is where we go back and once we've built a project, we'll monitor it and we'll ask the residents questions and try and really understand what we've done with this one-off thing and how we can do it better next time and feed it in. And as part of that journey, then we really wanted to, what we found was that what we were predicting in terms of energy wasn't what was happening, right? And we found that there was this gap between what we thought and what was actually happening. And we're all kind of geeky in the practice, and we got really annoyed about that. And so we've tried to solve that. And the route that we took to solve that, the thing that we've found that works time and time again, is the Passive House standard. And we use the Passive House standard a lot in the practice now. And you can see over there on the right-hand side, the amount of work, the amount of, the change in the amount of work that we've got that's Passive House standard. So now we're doing a lot of our housing, I can't say all of our housing, but a lot of our housing to Passive House standard. A lot of it is social housing, or all of it's social housing actually. It's all on a budget, very, very specific budgets. And in the last couple of years, what we've been doing is also taking that expertise into big non-domestic projects like schools and a swimming pool. So what I'm going to talk to you about is very briefly, and it might be that Jonathan has covered some of this. So very briefly, some of those principles, and then some projects and some nice pictures, because it's quite late at night. Let's see some pictures. That's what we're here for as architects, right? So that's the plan. as part of what we've been doing, so just to finish off what we've been doing, we've got this partnership with Stewart and Shields Builders, and that is a partnership and with them doing design and build. So they're building it and we're trying to get a solid cost basis, and you'll be able to give cost certainty to social housing, which is a really important thing for social housing landlords, is cost certainty in the build, but building all of them to passive house, which is kind of that's really interesting to us. We're also got a joint venture with another architect, Holmes Miller, and our Miller Sustainability, looking at non-domestic buildings, the big non-domestic buildings. So when I talk through all of these projects here and all of the ideas, that's within a partnership of, you know, a group of companies, maybe 5 or 6 companies, that we're all trying to do the same thing, and we're all trying to help each other, which is quite an interesting thing. You learn quite a lot from that. So I'm not going to go through this in any particular detail. Janet, I can send you the slides after and you can look at it. But COP was here last year. Scotland's meant to be zero carbon by 2045. That's a legally binding target. The UK is meant to be zero carbon by 2050. That's a legally binding target. Buildings last at least 60 years, which means anything that we design now is going to be, its end of life is 2080 or beyond. So there's only 2 options for us. Either we build something that is net zero carbon now, or we build something that is designed to be retrofit for net zero carbon. There's no other option. And it doesn't matter what any other architect or anyone else says. There's only 2 options because there's the legally binding target. So that's the only way forward. So what we've got to do, and my big head's in the way, isn't it? We've got to do 3 things: reduce the embodied, the operational emissions, reduce the embodied carbon, and maximize the amount of renewables. Really simple, 3 things. That's all we need to do, right? Now I'm going to tell you why it's complicated, but that's the 3 things. And across the UK, we're using a lot more energy. We're using a lot more energy than we can generate in renewables. So if, as a society, we want to become net zero carbon and meet all these targets, then what we've got to do is we've got to reduce the amount of energy that we're using in our buildings and maximize the amount of renewables. And somewhere in the middle, there's a spot where we can generate enough renewable energy and we've reduced our energy down, right? Now that spot means that the majority of our buildings have to be somewhere close to the passive house standard, right? To get to that spot, right? That's maybe not industrial, but certainly the residential and office. The other thing I talked very briefly about embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is the carbon that is used to build the buildings that we've got, right? And that carbon is used before the building is open. So all of your embodied carbon in your bricks, in your concrete, in your steel, when the day the building opens, you've already spent that carbon, right? And then the operational carbon is everything that comes from the heating. So a typical building regulations house over here on the left-hand side, 67% of it is the operational carbon, is the run-in, the energy from heating and hot water. And only 21% of it is embodied carbon. So it's not a very big fraction. If you go to something like a passive house, the amount of carbon is much smaller, but only 23% of it is for the heating and hot water. 50% of it, or more than 50%, 60% in some cases, is actually building the buildings. So you've spent all that carbon before anyone's actually moved in, which becomes a really big issue. And embodied carbon is one of the big blind spots of the construction industry because no one's measuring it, no one's monitoring it, there's no regulations for it. So that gives you a bit about the policy, a bit about the ideas. How do we achieve these net zero carbon houses? Well, we've got to reduce our operational energy. We've got to insulate things. We've got to make things more airtight. We've got to put some efficient heating in. And Jonathan was talking about heat pumps. So heat pumps, electric, that kind of thing. Got to be careful that by doing these two things, we don't create a whole load of health issues by sealing buildings up. So we've got to get some ventilation in there. That's really important. And ventilation can be a massive loss of energy. So some building regs houses that we've looked at, maybe 35% of the heat has been lost through the fact that through the infiltration and the lack of airtightness in the building. And so you're getting ventilation, but the cost of it is really a lot of energy. And that's a real problem. If you've got a really efficient heating system and you reduce things down in a passive house, then actually your hot water demand becomes the biggest demand. And so getting good hot water is important. Scotland and the UK is heating up. And if you've got well-insulated buildings, then you've got a risk of overheating. So you've got to make sure that you design that and think about it. And there's a move to electric systems. I'm not going to talk through all the stuff on the right-hand side, but the upshot of all of that is that all of the research that says where do we need to be to meet our net zero carbon targets comes down to being around the same targets as passive house, give or take, right? That's where UK's building stock has got to be. So what is passive house? What does it do? It does all these things. Every single thing on here is backed up by 3 or 4 different academic studies showing that passive house buildings do better than building regulations buildings in all of these criteria. The big one for me really is around fuel poverty, eliminating fuel poverty, which leads to low rent arrears, which leads to social housing tenants having more money in their pocket. And I think that's a really important social aspiration. And that's, you know, I'm going to talk a lot about tech stuff, but the idea that people are choosing between, I've got a real bee in my bonnet about the fact that fuel poverty is a political issue. It's not a technical issue. We can technically build houses that mean people don't need to be in fuel poverty, and we're not. And that's a political issue to my mind. But anyway, comfortable living environment, low carbon emissions, construction quality, blah, 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 all of that. I'll say very quickly on this. Passive house is 3 things. It's a certified building performance standard. Behind that, there's a calculation to work out how much energy your building is using. You don't need to meet the performance standard in order to use the calculation. So we use the calculation on quite a wide range of buildings to see what the energy performance is. And the energy performance is often very close to what the calculation method suggests, even for non-passive house buildings, which is interesting. The whole thing about EPCs, you know, EPCC or EPCA or whatever, very often we find that there's a gap between what that predicts and what it actually is, but we find it much closer in the passive house calculation. And then you can get certified components, like you can get passive house windows, and I'm a passive house person, you know, great. And that can help you get to the certified building standard. And you could do it for a whole range of buildings. So we're working on all of these types of buildings at the moment. Housing, as I say, we've done social housing, there's private housing, we've done private housing. Schools, we're looking at 6 schools across the UK to passive house standard. Retrofit, so we're retrofitting a tenement, a traditional sandstone tenement in Glasgow to passive house standards at the moment. It might not be the way that we do all the tenements, it's really complicated, but it might teach us some things that we can then put into other projects. We're doing a swimming pool in Blairgowrie and offices and other, a rowing club and other different things. It's quite good. Passive house is basically about human comfort, about how people perceive comfort. I've got a little bit of spiel about this, but time's pretty short, so I'm not going to go through it. But if you want that, I'm quite happy to. There's videos on our website and things like that. But it's all about how is your body comfortable at as lower room temperature as possible, and how do we get that energy efficiency from that? But it's about being comfortable. and it's about building physics. And this is what it means for a building. It means that you have a lot of insulation, which you would expect, but you also have triple glazed windows, not just for the energy side of things, but they also help people feel comfortable in a room. A single glazed window makes you feel cold, or can make you feel cold. A triple glazed window can keep you warm. It means that if you have all the surfaces in a room at the same temperature, then actually people will be happier with a lower air temperature, which is quite interesting. So passive houses are typically heated to 0.5 or 1 degree cooler than a building regs house, but people feel more comfortable, which is a interesting thing. Triple glazing, we're looking at the sun. We're trying to design for passive solar gain, but we're trying not to get it to overheat in the summer. We're making the whole building airtight, so we're not getting the drafts. Because we made it airtight, we're going to put in a good ventilation system, and that ventilation system is going to recover the heat from the stale outgoing air and put that heat into the fresh incoming air. So you've always got fresh air coming in, but you're keeping the heat in the house. And if you do all that in Scotland, you only need a really small heating system to keep all that going. The big issue for the heating system, frankly, is hot water. And where do you get your hot water from? And how, so most of our heating systems are sized for the hot water demand and not for the heating demand, which is an interesting thing. Once you've reduced your operational energy, thinking about embodied energy, thinking about retrofitting, thinking about reducing concrete, reducing steel, maximizing timber, looking at local materials and things like that. This gives us an idea of, this is how we calculate and think about that. We look at big volume things, like the structure. We look at things that are really heavy, like the foundations. And we look at the things got a lot of carbon in them, like steel and steel and copper and things like that. And we look to reduce all of them down and swap them for more natural options. I would suggest that only when you've done the first two things should you be thinking about putting PV on, and should you be designing for renewables. I think that you shouldn't be doing that until you've reduced your operational energy and your embodied carbon as much as possible. And as a last resort, and particularly in public projects at the moment, only after you've done all that and maximize the amount of PV should you even consider offsetting and paying for trees in sub-Sahara or wherever all these offsetting schemes are. You only do that after you've done all the other things. And then there's some future-proofing things, thinking about peak energy demand, thinking about electric vehicles, thinking about behavior change, fossil-free heating and hot water. Jonathan mentioned gas is being phased out, but there's other, there's other issues around that. Water-saving measures, especially hot water, because hot water is going to become the big demand. So if you can use less of it, then that's great. And monitor it and so on, and learning from that. This is a little diagram. I'm just going to talk about this little car diagram up here very quickly, because there's a big move towards electric systems, and there's talk about hydrogen. You can see down in the bottom here, hydrogen versus electric. And I really think that as a society, we need to be looking for the most efficient use of the energy that we've got. Now, the diagram on the left, I'll send it to you, but it shows that about 60% of the energy that's used in the that's taken out of the ground or out of the sky in the United States, about 60% of that is wasted in inefficiency. Like motors are not 100% efficient. Transmission is not 100% efficient. And when you add that up, 60% of the energy is wasted, and only 30% is used for a useful thing. And this little diagram with the car says exactly the same thing. If you have the same amount of primary energy that you've dug out of the ground or generated from a wind turbine or whatever, how far does a combustion engine car go versus an electric car? And the answer is an electric car goes twice as far with that same amount of energy. So as a society, if we move to more electric systems that are more efficient, then we will get more out of our renewables. Whereas if we convert it to hydrogen or convert it to something else, then we end up with inefficiencies and we have to generate more to heat our homes. So that is about moving to electric. I think I've talked enough tech stuff, and I apologize for that, but I do think that that is important as a background to some of our projects. So the first one is now 10 years old, no, maybe 12 years old now, maybe even more, is up in the Highlands. This is 2 houses for social rent on a brownfield site for key workers. The land was owned by the Forestry Commission. So this was to a pretty decent energy standard. We looked at the energy standard, that was pretty good for the time. Code for Sustainable Homes level 4, if anyone remembers, Code for Sustainable Homes. One of the things we did here was we really investigated Scottish timber. And so the majority of the timber in this project is all sourced within about 50 miles of the project. Again, it's a social housing project. It's not a niche private project. This was all built to a budget. So the timber kit is all Scottish timber. It's Scottish larch clad in, and there's Douglas fir in there as well. The windows came from Norway and their timber. That was a bit of a shame. And we got a wood fiber insulation, but that's not made in the UK. So that came from Germany. But other than that, is all good, good timber. Yeah, good Scottish timber. And that the thing about that was, that got started. It's part of this path about thinking about embodied carbon and where our materials come from and what can we do for the rural economy by making use of the resources that Scotland's got. That led us on to look at some timber houses for the Highland Expo. So these are made of cross-laminated timber. It was imported, but at the time we were trying to set up production, or trying to get a company to set up production in the UK. So we were trying to get Scottish timber involved in that. And then this is up in Findorn. This is 25 houses and flats for co-housing. This is all Scottish timber frame. It's got CLT in the intermediate floors. Again, that was imported. It's up around passive house insulation levels, but we didn't. The client wasn't keen on air tightness for reasons I'm still not slightly perplexed about. So the air tightness wasn't as good as passive house, but the insulation it's got a lot of cellulose insulation in all of this. So they're performing really well. Everyone's really happy with them. And we designed all the roofs for PV. So it's that whole thing of we've reduced the operational energy, we reduce the embodied energy, and the next thing is to look at PV. So the whole development is designed around PV, and there's also solar water heating on there for the hot water. As you can see, these are solar water and these are PV panels. So yeah, quite like them. That's good. Balmahar, we're just hopefully going on site with that shortly. That's 20 houses for social housing provider, but again, it's the same kind of ethos, looking at Scottish timber, looking at local resources and so on. This is slightly different. This is in Shettleston in Glasgow. This is 19 flats, and these 5 here, we worked with the contractor to convert these to passive house, and these are all built to building standards that are in here. And we've compared the 2 of them. They're right next to each other. They've got the same occupation. They were built at the same time. They were built by the same contractor. They were built by the same, the same architects were involved, but they're built to different standards, and we're able to compare them. And the air quality in the passive house is significantly better than the building regulations. The gas bills they're gas boilers, but the gas bills are significantly lower, and the electric bills are significantly lower as well, even though they're pretty much exactly the same, built by the same people. It's just 2 different standards. So it kind of validates our view of passive house. before Christmas, and I say that because of the price rises, before Christmas, the Housing Association reported that the average energy bill for all the energy for each flat was around £50 a month, which is pretty good for a 2-bedroom flat. I think that's... But it gets better because this is in St Boswell's. These are 3-bedroom houses that are all built to Passive House standards. And the Housing Association at the same time reported that a 3-bedroom house was also on average running at £50 a month for all their energy bills, which again, certainly compared to my house is, which is, quite a lot cheaper. He says there's not a lot of energy being used there. The majority of the energy, we're still monitoring these, but it looks like the majority of the energy is being used in hot water. It looks like the heating is costing around £5 a month, but the hot water is costing about £25 to £30. The same time as building St Boswell's, we were building Closeburn for a development trust. These are for social rent. This is Scottish Land Fund and Rural Housing Fund, and wind farm money all kind of came together. So we got really good air tightness. That's 0.3 air changes, which is at least 20 times better than the current building regulations, which is quite good. Lynn Walk is up in Gairloch Head. This is finished. Actually, I thought that should be a completion photo, but it's not, is it? This is a mixture of houses and flats. It's the same script. It's really low. You know, the residents have moved in. They're not spending much on their heating and their heating bills. They're really low energy, and we're doing some monitoring of that as well. And we're just on site at the moment with 10 houses for Scottish Borders, in the Scottish Borders, sorry, for Eildon Housing Association. Also Passive House, also timber frame, yeah, so yeah, that's all that's due for completion later this year. But all the same ilk. Interestingly, all pretty rural. Most of the rural housing associations are pretty up on fuel poverty issues. In the city, a lot of housing associations have converted their flats to gas. So you're not getting the same level of fuel poverty compared to direct electric. So yeah, quite interesting. We're doing this project down in Lancaster, which is 20 houses and flats down here for a community land trust and a housing association. Really interesting partnership between them. And it's next to a whole load of developer housing. So we're doing quite a social street in between, a whole pedestrianised street, and all very social, and everyone's into, you know, comes out onto the street, and then the parking's at the edge to kind of have some kind of ownership of the space and some kind of sense of community in there, even though it's still social housing. And you know, doing some work in Braemar. We're hoping to get planning for this very soon. The planning process has been pretty tortuous, but 15 houses and flats, and the community want this to be local timber. We've calculated the embodied carbon. It's Passive House. It's being funded by the Scottish Rural Housing Fund, which is great, and it's been developed by a development trust. So all very interesting, nice and colourful. And we've got a project, a much bigger project in Western Bartonshire that we're working on, which is 70 flats for social rent, much more urban. But still, that's trying to build to Passive House. Not to Passive House, but thinking about retrofit. This is Langham. We've just finished converting this B-listed police station into 4 flats. This is about looking at you know, obviously keeping stuff and retrofitting stuff rather than demolishing it and new build. The 2 police cells. One of the police cells is a bathroom for the flats, and we've kept the original door. Which is all very nice. We didn't keep the original toilet, sadly, but we've kept the original door and kept all the tiles. And that kind of leads us onto Nidri Road, which is this tenement which we're refurbishing to Passive House standards. I think I'm probably quite close to running out of time, so I'm just going to skip through a couple of other things. It's nice pictures of schools. You don't need to know about the schools, but they're Passive House. They're really low embodied energy, embodied carbon, and these are all due on site in the next 12 months. You don't need to see all that. This is the swimming pool in Perthshire, which is in for planning at the moment and due on site in September, which will be passive house. With a bit of luck, it could be the second passive house swimming pool in the UK and the 5th in the world, which basically means it's been really complicated. But yeah, it's good. It's all going to be timber, which would be nice. School, brilliant, great. And we're just looking at a big project in Dundee for a new secondary campus school, which is really massive, like unbelievably massive, which is really complicated as well. And we're also looking at some schools in the Highlands as well, which is quite nice, or very rural. I'm going to skip all of these because we've talked about retrofit, and just say, I hope that's been interesting, and I welcome any discussion, but thank you very much for your time.
Oh, that was really impressive, Jonathan. I think certainly, I mean, I just read through we put in a response to the Council's Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy, which I'm not sure whether they'd even talk to you about that, because all of these things that you've mentioned were completely missing from it, which seemed to be a bit of a, but it's very reassuring to know that you have got a lot of these things in hand. And I mean, one of the questions I'd had is obviously parts of bigger or older houses in the conservation area, and how realistic do you think it will be to get those sort of houses up to, you know, band C level? Because it's, you know, you can do bits and pieces. I mean, I've got solar panels on my house, but what I really need to do is insulate the walls, but that's quite a big messy job. And you know, it's not something that's kind of glamorous, and you know, it would be, you know, so it's challenges of older houses and how to deal with them.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. On the first point, we do work with colleagues. So what sits between the Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy and then the likes of the LHS is a bit like that. They have an action plan that sits behind, which covers all the things that all the different council resources and partners are going to put in to try and drive that strategy forward. So what they're consulting on just now is the kind of high level document, which says what the overall aims are. But within that, there is all the nitty gritty stuff around, okay, well, we need to build district heating systems. We need to get the energy efficiency of stock right the way up. We need to find a way to decarbonise swimming pools, which use a lot of energy. When we build schools, we need to find a way of powering them that doesn't have a gas boiler or doesn't have a biomass boiler, which 5 years ago we were told, put biomass boilers in, that'll save the world. And
yeah, because I've heard that you're looking at putting in this, or possible feasibility of putting in district heating from ground source heat pumps in parks and things like that, which sounds quite promising. That's
it. So there is a lot of feasibility being done on it, and there's a lot of work that is going on behind the scenes. But we did make the point, but we certainly responded to the consultation on the climate change strategy as well and said, you're missing this, this, and this. So hopefully that'll come through in the final ones. In relation to the older building point, yeah, you're absolutely right. And this year, anyways, the first time that we've seen any kind of recognition from the Scottish Government that actually it might not be possible to do all these big ticket things that they want to do, or the cost is just not going to be able to do that. So if you're an owner of an older building, the terminology that's jumping out to us just now is as far as reasonably possible. So they're saying that to landlords at the moment. So they're recognising that you know, you can do all these things. You can put solar panels on, you can insulate to the max, you can change your heating system to something more efficient. But ultimately, if your building's 100 years old, there's only so much of this stuff you can do. If you live in a conservation area, you can't cover it in solar panels, not all the time. You can't put external wall insulation on. So sometimes it's just going to have to say, well, I've done the best I can with that. I would say technology is improving all the time. So what might not work just now in terms of getting your EPC rating down will work in the future. Solar panels and battery storage are improving all the time. So right now it's solar panels that go into the circuit in the house. We're now seeing a real shift towards battery storage and loft spaces, which makes such a difference. If you can store the power, then it stays within your own property. You know, eventually you're not going to need a connection to the national grid because your batteries will be that efficient that you'll be able to power everything from your own property. So we're seeing big advancements in the likes of air source heat pumps as well that used to, they still are kind of great big clunky boxes that sit on the outside and look like air conditioning units. I reckon in 10 years' time, these will be things that sit on your kitchen windowsill, you know, and it'll just pump the whole heat into the whole of the house. There is a shift, and the government have done really well with this. There is a shift in the market and saying to the current boiler makers and the people that are making these, investing a lot in this kind of technology, there's a market going to be coming here for you. I think the biggest thing, and I probably omitted it from my presentation, was after 2024, I believe it is, you're not going to be able to build a house with a gas boiler. So it's going to have to go with a probably the cheapest solution at the moment is an air source heat pump. But you're right, developers will find ways to save money. And if it is, then okay, well, we can put a ground source heat pump. If we can put a water source heat pump in that'll make a district heating system in this new development, that'll save us having to do these maintenance costs for all these new air source heat pumps that we're putting in. So I would say that if you can't see a way out of it at the moment, if you think, I'm scratching your head and I've done everything I can to get this property as good as I can, then that's great for now. You've certainly done your bit in terms of meeting the climate change agenda. But 10 years' time, the world will be a different place in terms of this kind of technology and the focus on this, and who knows what will be there. And I think it'll become standard practice that when you look to renew your boiler, you won't be given another boiler as a first option. You'll be given an electric heating source, and then it's about how you maximise that. It's not going to be as scary or as unknown as it is just now, because it's moving at such a fast pace.
I think we've got Roger Curtis has got his hand up for a question.
Yeah, I had solar panels put in 2014. I had a surveyor come and he says I'm on level C on the heat conservation, but I still have people coming round knocking on the doors saying I can get grants for cavity wall insulation, which I'm pretty sure I've got. You know, how do I know who's the genuine person and who's not? You know, I don't want to get scammed off or have extra cavity wall insulation, then you get damp coming in and all that stuff. You know,
because you're in a timber framed house, so have you even got cavities, Roger?
Sorry?
Your house is timber framed, so have you even got cavities?
Yeah, I've got cavities. I can see them when I had a window changed and when the surveyor came. But, you know, I suppose, he's supposed to be there. You could see where the window frame, when it came out, you could see a cavity and you could see insulation on there. They just get so confusing to know if I can genuinely improve or I'm just going to be ripped off by somebody.
Yep. I think it's a very good question, Roger, and I touched upon it briefly in the presentation, but it's a minefield out there. And I think the Green Deal that happened, certainly before my time in the 90s or whatever it was, kind of gave everyone a bit of a fright when it was all these cowboy companies ripping people off, saying, yeah, you can get government money for this, this and this. And you realise then you were stuck in a subscription for paying back this thing over the next 5 years and you were a homeowner and stuff. So I would say there is a statement of intent on the council's website which requires anybody who's looking to access public funding through the eco scheme to sign up to. So they then have a strict criteria that they have to abide by. So they're not allowed to do cold calling for a start. They're not allowed to. They can hand out flyers and things like that and whatever, but they shouldn't be champing people's doors to say, I can get you this. That immediately puts the fear into people. So we don't encourage that. We certainly don't allow anybody to do that. We all these people that are on this statement of intent, and there's an approved supplier list on the council's website. So if you get somebody that's saying they can put a new boiler in your home or internal insulation on your home, run their details through the website and see if they're on the approved supplier. There is also it's regulated by the Ofgem, that whole industry, so they also can do verification checks for you as well. So it does require you to be a bit savvy about it, but there is checks and balances in place for that.
Yeah.
We would always recommend that if anybody's offering you anything for free, anybody's offering anything that you need to still sign up to, that you just do a couple of little additional checks, and by all means you can phone our investment team at the council who'd be able to tell you if that we know that they're working in particular areas, or trading standards would be your best bet as well. If anybody's trying to really, if you think that they're just ripping me off, then go straight to trading standards who have the enforcement powers to put a stop to them.
Because we've had people trying to sell us cavity wall insulation. I've got 4 foot thick stone walls. I know I haven't got cavity. Yeah. So
one of the problems is when you buy a house, you don't know the internal bits. I know what regulations there was supposed to be when it was built, which is only about 17 years ago. Whether or not they would conform to, that's another matter, of course. I trust they were. But that's beautiful about Janet being trying to sell cavity wall insulation. That's lovely.
Yeah, Jonathan, would you be able to email me the who to contact at SLC if people have questions about this sort of thing, and also the link to the approved supplier list that you've got on the SLC website, because the SLC website is quite a big thing and it's not always easy to find things on it.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. It's a terrible website,
Yeah.
but I'm not allowed to say that.
Matt's put his hand up.
Yeah, I haven't seen Jonathan's presentation, so apologies for that. And you might have covered it, Jonathan. But from my point of view, and I'm not going to talk about retrofit, but we do a huge amount of retrofit. The idea that a single thing can be applied to any houses in bigger or anywhere else, and that people are coming around and knocking on the door saying this is the answer, to me sets off a whole series of alarm bells anyway. And I think particularly I mean we're doing a project at the moment looking at how do you bring relatively modern timber frame houses up to the standard that is going to be needed for social housing in the next I think it's the next 5 or 6 years. I can't remember the exact time frame, but we're looking at that for a housing association, and it's quite complicated. And if you take a stone house, it's quite complicated, and there isn't one thing that fits that. You need to look at maybe 2 or 3 things to do that. So I would just caution, my caution would be, if anyone's coming and knocking on the door and saying, cavity wall insulation, it's going to sort you out kind of thing, I'd go, I'm not that. It's a bit like I see our role as architects a bit like GPs, and looking at the whole person and trying to work out if the whole person is well. Whereas the cavity wall installer is just like an orthopedic who wants to just put some metalwork in your leg and be done with it. Just on if you take it on that way, in answer to your question, Roger, I would before you signed up for anything, I would try and find someone who could give you the GP, the whole house look at the thing before you sign up and say, oh yeah, well this is right for me kind of thing.
Because I believe
that with the surveyor who came round when having the solar panels put in.
And I believe Energy Saving Trust will do free advice, will do a free home energy check. And I know they weren't doing the on the ground visits during COVID, but I would imagine now things are getting a little bit more relaxed. Maybe they are. So because it's on my bucket list to come and look at my house, because some of the things that you get aren't applicable, aren't going to be applicable to my house. So it's just, I think every building is different, and I suspect Jonathan's covered this, but there's a whole big thing in retrofit at the moment about unintended consequences. And you do one thing there and suddenly you find you've got damp over here, or you've got and it's worth the amount of money that all of these things cost. Even if you're notionally getting them for free, it's worth paying someone to come and have a little look and just set your mind at ease, that the big picture is right, if that makes sense. That's and there's plenty of people, surveyors, architects, or whatever, that there's a lot of people that do that. But
essentially you're making these improvements, and you're right that the carrot is there, that you get them through grant funding from the government, or you get them through eco schemes or whatever it might be. But you wouldn't make a big investment in your house without doing any due diligence, or out getting a couple of quotes from different people. You wouldn't put a new kitchen in without that kind of due diligence that you do. So essentially you're still tampering with the fabric of the building the way that you are in any kind of big upgrades like that. So it's absolutely worth making sure you do the research and do that. And there is advice agencies available to do that. The council can offer, point you in the right direction for advice as well. And as I say, the checks and balances are there as well for making sure you don't get any cowboys wanting to come and do the work for you. But Matt's absolutely right. It's not one size fits all. And I was saying, I think before you came on the call, Matt, that there is a kind of change in terminology coming from the government now, which is rather than you must have EPC done by 2040, whatever it is for owner occupiers, it's now as far as reasonably possible. And so they recognise that not all houses are going to get there. The pipe dream's gone with that. They recognise that owners don't have the money to do that. They reckon that social landlords don't have the money to do that, and tenants shouldn't be paying for that. So, okay, what can you do with these 100 plus old new buildings that have been constructed in a certain way that aren't ever going to get to the EPC band Bs and As what they want everyone to get to? So I think if you're trying to do your bit, then that's good. And then technology will catch up eventually, and that'll help us along the way as well as we move on.
I think if there are no, sorry, Hamish, have you got a question for Jonathan?
Just a brief one. You showed up the modern bungalows just completed. Were those solar panels on the roof for electricity generation, or were they for hot water from solar radiation?
It'd be electricity generation.
Right.
So we haven't. So it's a requirement that we put them in. We go up, but the requirements are that small that you can actually put them in a tiny little postage stamp size one. So you see that on some of the private developers tend to do that, and you'll see that they're there just as a token gesture, I think, to say that you're getting solar panels on your roof. But for ours, they are quite effective, and they're embedded as well in the roof tiles, so they don't sit on top. So therefore, you actually, from a developer point of view, from our own development, you actually save a bit of money on your roof tiles by putting in solar PVs, because you don't need to have a full coverage of roof tiles. But
this means you've got large dark blue roof tiles.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and they've got the heat, the generation element just underneath them as well. So it's all about trying to keep his energy costs as low as possible for the tenants that are going into there, and that's one of the aspects that we do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much. That was really interesting. Roger's got his hand up already, so I'll let.
I'm interested. It appears a lot of these houses you showed, they're wood houses. How long is the wood going to last?
The issue with wood is about the detailing. Okay, so if you can protect the wood with the correct detailing, then it is a durable product and should last many years. So Russ would say that 25 years is the minimum design life on it, and there's timber buildings that have been up for 40-50 years. The Forestry Commission did a series of timber buildings in about the 70s, Swedish timber type, that are all still clad in their original cladding, and that wasn't as durable timber as the Scottish larch. So the Glenmore houses, after 12 years, have silvered down. They're definitely, that image was taken when they were new. They've silvered down. I've been past them, but the timber's looking in good condition, and it's about the detailing and getting the water to run off and get the water to run away. That's the thing. So
a brick house, you expect 100 odd years. It's I'm just wondering.
But a brick house has still got a timber frame behind it, and I would argue that many of the ways that timber frame houses have been built by developers recently, it doesn't matter about the brick. The timber frame is not going to last 100 years because there's moisture and moisture and damp and so on issues in a lot of them. So I appreciate. What I would say is I'm not an advocate of timber in an urban situation, because I think in the city you've got other things going on. You've got pollutants which can help break down the timber, and we use a lot of brick in the city. But outside of the city, then I think compared to other materials that are within the budget of a housing association, you've got render on board, which probably has got a similar life to timber. You have got brick. I appreciate that. You've got brick as an option. Issue with brick is you've got a different foundation. There's complications around brick and the foundation. It's more expensive from that point of view. We do have quite a lot of issues around brick layers and availability of that and so on. So I take your point. Yeah, but I would say that the timber isn't the major.
If I'm buying a house, I hope it's going to last a lifetime.
Yes.
That's the only thing. I mean, they look very good, and maybe they're easier to sort of replace.
The timber, the way that we do the timber is it's a rain screen, so it's not providing, it's sheltering the waterproof. And this is the thing about cavity insulation, right? The cavity in that situation is doing a massive job, in that you need the cavity because you need the water to be able to run down the back of the timber and come out. And it's the same with bricks. You need the water to go into the brick, come down the back of it and come out. And if you muck that up by putting the wrong stuff in there, then you've actually you've compromised the waterproofness of your house. So that's
what I've always worried about.
I would say the detailing. I mean, I'm hoping to build a house and it'll be clad in timber. So I don't know whether that gives you an endorsement or says I'm a bit of an idiot, but it's one or the other, isn't it? That's
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Wasn't there some research up in the Aberdeen area that concluded that the workmanship in putting insulation into the cavity was often appalling and likely to create problems rather than solve anything?
I mean, I don't. It's Jonathan's area, cavity wall insulation, but I would only advocate it as part of a whole house approach. I wouldn't advocate it as an individual measure, because you've got to look at what is the wall doing, what is that cavity doing, what is the external material of the wall doing. In some areas you can do that, and maybe you need to then paint the outside of the wall to have moisture resistance there, so that you're not getting the water into the cavity. But is that then setting up a moisture issue inside the wall somewhere, and you're getting interstitial condensation and so on? It turns out it's quite complicated, I would say. And the idea of just pumping some random stuff in that some guy off the street says is all right, I can't imagine how many times that's gone right, to be honest, rather than how many times it's gone wrong because of all the work we've done.
I was interested in the Tenement Project, partly because I was interested to see how, was that all owned by the same person, or did you have to get lots of tenants signed up? And you think of tenements in Edinburgh, you've got a mixture of Airbnbs, commercial owner occupiers. How do you make it happen?
So the practice has been working on tenements since we started 30 years ago, and John was working on them 30 years before that. The Nidri Road project is really special because the housing association owned all of the block, and it needed significant internal remodeling and remediation work, and so they moved everyone out. So we had an empty block that we have taken apart, and we've taken the floors out in between the flats. We've stripped everything back to the stone. It's not, from that sense, it's not a replicable project, because you couldn't do that in a mixed block, right? So we know that, and the project has been done on the basis that we're all aware of that. The interesting thing is that if we can find some techniques that work really well, then it might be that those techniques can be transferred to individual flats. I've got a really big thing about the fact, particularly in Glasgow, particularly in the west of Scotland, I think that windy days are colder than cold, still days. And I think that's to do with air tightness. And we're doing some research in the practice, and we're trying, Nidri Road is part of that, is improving the air tightness as good as putting in insulation? In which case, you could, if that's the learning from this, then that's easier to do in a tenement than it is to put big squishy insulation in, particularly plastic insulation and things like that. It's a lot more robust to make a building airtight with a thin thing than putting big chunks of insulation. So it might be that one of the findings from this is that airtightness is more important than insulation, for instance.
Well, that certainly applies to an old house. It's the windy days that are the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of development in insulation over the last 20 years, and there's lots of different techniques and there's lots of different companies, but you don't get an air tightness company. You can't phone up an air tightness company and come and say, right, make my building airtight.
No.
And that's just like, what? You know.
But I guess if you make a building airtight, then you have to have some sort of forced air ventilation system with a heat exchanger, because otherwise you're going to get damp and build up and everything else. So
and I mean, part of what we've been doing over the last 5 years, we've monitored just about every different type of ventilation system in a whole range of different buildings to understand their efficiency. So we did a big project where we monitored 50 new build houses to look at their ventilation and whether the ventilation was working. I will say only three of the systems were set up in a way that met the building regulations requirements. The rest of them, there were 8 of them that simply weren't wired in. Like, you know, this extraordinary level of
incompetence.
I'm not going to say incompetence, although I should, but disregard for ventilation as a thing. And I think that's that. And I think, the Nidri Road project, I think, has got a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn for the whole of the industry. But I do wonder whether air tightness and ventilation might be the thing that comes out of it as being important compared to just whether it's wood fibre or whether it's whatever on the inside.
Can I ask about insulation? And just as a side comment as well, we lived in a Victorian house which was built in a German way. So we had a 9-inch air gap.
Oh, right.
And then later on in our possession of the building, we actually put ventrola system in, single glazed. And the combination of the air gap and the glazing, and the fact that they put baffles and they sealed the shutter boxes and things, made a huge difference to that house. And I would also agree about the windy days. That was, yes. But the thing I did want to ask about was, I noticed you said that you used wood insulation. This is I don't know whether it's feasible or not, but I have wondered whether all these fleeces which come off our sheep every year could possibly be put to good insulation use in the building trade.
Yeah, there's 2 sheep's wool insulation companies in the UK, Black Mountain and Thermofleece. I don't know whether they've actually combined or I don't know, but there was 2. There was 2. There might, they use Welsh wool, and there's a machine in the Innovation Centre in Blantyre which will take any fluffy material and turn it into insulation. And it does it in small batches. So if you've got a whole load of sheep's wool and you've got a project, then they'll do the bit in between. They'll make it into an insulated bat for you, which is pretty cool.
And could I also just say that we live in one of the modern private houses near this brilliant social housing development here in Biggar. And yes, when set up originally, the fans were not properly set up. So we discovered we had moisture on the inside of our windows. We rejig them so that they do switch themselves on at times when the humidity is high. And since then, we've had no problems. It's very simple to dry washing inside. There's no problem. It really, ours isn't a passive house.
No.
It's close to it.
Yeah.
And it's so much better. And I agree with your comment about if you tolerate a lower temperature. I don't. It's worth doing it.
There's there's been a lot of research by Sterling Howison at Strathclyde University about linking the different construction techniques from post-war period for housing and the rise of asthma in children. And whilst you can't say for certain there is a link, when you look at all of his papers and look at all of the things, then, you know, if there isn't a link, then there is a huge amount of coincidence that is going on, you know. And that's to do with ventilation, with, you know, using plastic vapor control layers in buildings, using a lot more plastic in buildings and things like that. And you know, the thing that we've found through all of our testing is that a leaky building does not mean that it's got good indoor air quality. You can still have a leaky building with bad indoor air quality. So, you know, I mean, ventilation's really a big thing for us, and you know, we've done a lot of work on it. But yeah, and so I'm not gonna dispute anything you're saying there, you know. But we think it's really important, and there's you know, there isn't any limits on housing, but there are indoor air quality limits on all our schools. Every new school has to hit certain targets. You know, I think if it's good enough for kids, then it's good enough for everyone. You know, do you know what I mean? That's
well, especially elderly people with breathing problems.
yeah, and I think in the middle of a pandemic of respiratory disease, then you know, we should be thinking. I think it's quite good that the government is talking about ventilation as part of the pandemic and opening windows and things like that, because that's, you know, we should be talking more about indoor air quality in general.
Yeah, but I guess opening windows, though, if you're just opening windows on a winter day, you know, that is
yeah. You've got a big energy penalty from that. Yeah.
I mean, it's all right in the summer, but, you know, I mean, and having openable windows, but it's having, and I think that leads me on to actually another question I had, when you talked about where you've got calculations of how things were going to perform, and then when you put the people into them, they didn't. Is that because, say, people are opening windows at the wrong times, or putting in electric heaters so they can get a burst of heat? Because if they've, you know, if you've got a pump, you've got a steady source of heat, and people want to have a little bit of oomph when they get in. Or I
think the biggest study we did was houses that were designed in 2007 and built between 2007 and 2010. So they're 4 iterations of the building regulations at least ago, but ventilation wasn't really at that stage we were meeting the building regulations for ventilation. We weren't, you know, we hadn't got a body of research there that we were working with, and the heating system was designed by the contractor, which was normal and is still normal, and so one of the big things was that people were opening their windows while the heating was on. So we had 2 houses, identical houses, and 2 end terraces. You know, they were just mirrors of each other. They had the same occupation, aside from one person had a cat and the other one didn't, or something like that. And, you know, it's the same thing. And the difference in the performance was 250%. So one person was paying less than half the other. And when we looked into their habits and how they did it, it seemed to be that the difference was that the people who had lower bills turned their heating off when they opened their windows. And they opened their windows roughly the same amount of time, but they turned their heating off. And the other one had its heating on all day, and they opened and closed their windows as they wanted. And that was all to do with ventilation. I mean, this is one of the things from the history of the practice that we just kind of sat there going, well, we didn't design that, and that's not very good, is it? I mean, you do just generally sit down and go, well, that's not good. We've got to fix that. We've got to do something about it, right? I mean, we can't necessarily change the houses that we've built, but we're not building that again. And that gets you into the thing, well, how do we develop that? How do we show the value of it? How do we, you know, how do we change the techniques to do that? And that, you know, that started us on a road that has taken us to where we are.
With heating, I mean, I had a dear friend who wouldn't, the heating was set by some supply, someone else, and she wouldn't let anybody touch it. As far as she was concerned, once it had been set, And I could imagine that for a lot of older people, they don't want to be fiddling about it. So you would need something that, well, you had some sort of automated control where, you know, well, thermostats or something. But maybe the technology for some people is too complicated, or they just don't want to know about it, you know.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree about that. And again, because we've been asking people questions about how they find that, how do they control the house and things like that. Complicated. The Juneland project had underfloor heating on the ground floor. This is me sharing, all of our kind of dirty laundry kind of thing, but airing it all. But had underfloor heating, which everyone was like, underfloor heating is great, but the thing with underfloor heating is that you need a thermostat in each room, because that needs to say whether the room's hot or cold enough. So that's fine. And each of the thermostats that were specified by the mechanical engineer, they weren't specified by us, they were specified by the engineer. What we didn't realize was each of them had a clock in it as well. Now, you can't tell that when you look at a thermostat. It's just a thermostat, but it had a clock in it. And Juneland is in a rural area, and they have very small outages. Like every 5 or 6 hours, they'll maybe get 3 or 4 seconds of outage. Maybe they get 5 minutes in the middle of the night or something like that. But within every 24-hour period, normally they had a little outage, and it reset this clock in the thermostat. And it took months to work out what was going on, because everyone was like, well, we've set the thermostat and suddenly we've got a warm room, or suddenly the thing isn't on or whatever. And it was because every time the thing clicked out, it reset all the clocks. Why do you need a clock in the thermostat? Like what? And to that level of complexity, I mean, even us and the M&E engineer, we were like, why have they put a clock in the thermostat? I mean, why? No one would think of it. So yeah, all of that stuff, all of the controls, that's an extreme example, but the controls are really important. So one of our developments, the ventilation system we used was really complicated. It had a little touch screen thing that was really complicated. So we hid that in the cupboard, and we just put a big button on the wall that said boost, and we got it engraved with boost. So you didn't touch the little screen. The screen was in the cupboard. The housing association sent someone to look at that if they needed to look at it. And all you had to do was see the boost button and go, I need more ventilation. I pressed the boost button. And that was remarkably effective. And you just took the idea of all these options and hid it in a cupboard. And some people went and fiddled with it, but most people just went, I just leave that alone. I just press the big button. It's
I guess also there's things like educating people about things like not opening your windows when you've got your heating on, unless you really need to. You do go.
Even I mean, Roger mentioned it earlier, that some people simply don't know what their house is built of. And even on a DIY level, knowing whether you've got a timber kit house or a breeze block house and where the insulation is makes a massive difference, because you can, I mean, we've all done DIY and we've all looked at it after, or looked at someone else's and gone, couldn't have done that. But quite a lot of people genuinely don't know. And that's the thing. A lot of brick houses look like they're brick and block, but 80% of housing in Scotland is timber frame. I would, even though probably 90% of it is clad in brick. So you're looking at it going, it's a brick house, it'll last forever, but it's got a timber frame behind it. If you fill the cavity of a timber frame, then your timber frame will rot. I absolutely guarantee that. It might not happen for 5 years, but it will rot.
Yeah, because my mother-in-law lives around the corner from Roger, and she got leafleted, as I think Roger had recently, by somebody offering cavity wall insulation, and it's new and it'll be fine. And she said several of her neighbours have had it put in. Now, whoever buys that house next won't probably even know that it's had in it, but they're going to have a pile of problems. So I mean, we talked about it and said, no, just don't touch it. And I'm glad you
And that's the thing. If you don't know that your house is timber frame, then you wouldn't even know what to Google. So it's it's a
obviously
really
down
interesting. It's a really interesting problem that, as I say, in our own small, we're a small practice. We're not big. But we try and talk building physics, and we try and talk, we talk aesthetics. We love to see what things are like, but also we're geeks and we like to know what things are. So.
Yeah, actually, just with a geeky question, when you had your little diagrams of the embodied carbon and your operational carbon, I just wondered, was the operational carbon based on the whole lifespan of the house, or was it an annual?
No, that's annual. Sorry, not annual. Sorry, lifespan. It's a 60-year lifespan.
60, yeah, that's what I wondered, because obviously you were going to get very different answers depending on. No,
it's a 60-year lifespan. So I mean, it's indicative. It was done by London Energy Transformation, that particular diagram. So it's it's quite generic, but the point is quite real in that we're building low energy houses, and we don't care what materials we're building them from, which seems bonkers because you're only getting the promise of low energy in the operational, but you're actually spending money, carbon, if you like, in the embodied carbon. You're spending that today.
Yeah. If you're building it of concrete and steel, it's not going to be great for the environment, is it?
It's not, no. Although there are ways of doing that. We are looking at using very high recycled content and using electric furnaces for steel, but that's a separate thing. But fundamentally, using concrete and steel is bad. But in the face of a climate emergency, my view is it might be better to put more focus on the embodied carbon in the short term and bring that down and change the industry and change all of the processes that go into the industry, rather than focus on really high performance, because that performance is future, is a promise, whereas the embodied carbon is being spent now, and we need to reduce that.
And also with timber, you've got the drawdown by the tree, which is then it's a long life timber product, and I've done work on greenhouse gas inventories, and if you have a tree and you make it into a tissue, then it's probably got a lifespan. The carbon is locked up for maybe a year. If you make it into a beam, it's locked up for 50 years, 3 centuries, who knows, but a long time, so.
And this is going off on a tangent, but I do think we'll look back and see that the Grenfell was a great tragedy, and there was a great deal of incompetence and unlawfulness around that. But I think there's an issue at the moment that some of the baby is being thrown out with the bathwater around the fire regulations, and timber is not an easy material to get through building control at the moment, for very good reasons around fire. But there are ways of dealing with it, and I think there's several things going on in the construction industry that mean that timber is not being used as much as it should. And I'm a firm advocate, as you can see in all the projects. A complete advocate of timber construction, and I think we should be doing more of that.
Is that even in low rise?
Low rise less so, but certainly in any bigger building. I mean, we have got some projects that are CLT, that are school size projects, but primary school, once you get beyond that, then the regs say, we've got 3 big secondary schools, and the idea of using timber, and the building control officer in one of them sniggered and said no, and you just kind of like, well, hold on a minute. That's you can't just so it's interesting. But on the other hand, the fire issues are pretty major, and if you get it wrong, then there's quite serious consequences. So
something like a secondary school, obviously.
Well,
you've got a building with hundreds of people in
it. But still,
Any more questions? If not, I think we'll. Any more? Well, just to say thanks very much, Matt. It's a really good talk. I think we had a talk from Energy Saving Trust. Was it last year or before? Yeah, last year, which was more skimming the surface of the subject, and I think this was really actually much more the level of talk that we wanted, a lot more detail and a lot more as you say, one size doesn't fit all advice, you know.
Yeah.
So no, I think this was you know, and just to get your experiences of how these buildings actually work with people in them, and the fact you've done it scientifically and seen what happens, which I think is really, really valuable. So thank you for coming along, and I know you've been very busy, and thanks very much for your time. And